for those people who don't know who I am. I think just about everybody here knows who I am. Anyway, we're going to be talking tonight, Fred and I are going to be talking about the history of music on the barge. Thought I'd start off with a little Shakespeare for those of you who had me as a teacher, just because I thought it sounded a little bit like what we might have been able to say about lots of the barge concerts. They weren't all sweet harmony, I guess, but most of them were pretty darn good. You'll notice that Fred has a head. Oh, come on in.
Come sit right in front of me.
Right in the front, Caroline. Come on.
Carolina,
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
Perfect.
Got her. No slinking. No slinking allowed. You probably noticed coming in that Fred has a really nice display up. Not only does he have a nice display, but he has all kinds of programs for music on the barge in the past. So I will be availing myself of every one of those for the archives. I'm not sure that I have them all. I doubt it. Anyway, those are just some of the kinds of posters we used when we didn't have Facebook to alert people to the fact that we were going to have a presentation in the summertime on music in the barge. And without further ado, I'd just like to talk to you for a second about how important music has always been to Gravenhurst. I don't think we could overestimate the role of music in this community and how much music has been made here. Starting with 1883, we have that first picture that I know of anyway of a Gravenhurst band. But in fact, there was a band in 1875 that greeted the train when it arrived here. The first train that came to Muskoka, and it arrived in 1875 November, and there was a band to greet it. And I thought, wow, I guess it probably wasn't a camera, but there was at least a band. So that's how far back we go with music. This picture is a whole lot better. Cameras had improved quite a bit in the sort of 13 years or so, or 12 years between the last one and this one. And those are Gravenhurst Citizens Band again. We have names for all of the people in these bands, by the way. So if you see somebody, you think, I wonder if that was my great uncle Larry, you can ask me and I can tell you. In fact, music was so important in Gravenhurst that when the Governor General and his wife were coming here in 1898, they were going to be greeted, in fact, by a band. Now, the band wasn't assembled yet in the bandstand, but they're kind of hovering in front of the bandstand over on the left-hand side. And in case you're wondering, that's Sullivan's Boots and Shoes store sign that's sticking out into the photograph. And
where would that be today? Like if you were standing there, where would that be?
Okay, you're looking at, well, the bandstand for a starter was in the marketplace, as was the old clerk's building. So you're behind the Opera House, okay? About where I'm standing, no, not quite, but pretty close. Yeah, pretty close.
St. Paul's Church.
Yes, that's St. Paul's right there. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that kind of gives you a rough idea of exactly where we are in that picture. In 1900, they moved the gazebo away from that marketplace because they were building, in the process of building the Opera House, which would be completed in March of 1901. People were already saying, oh, it's going to be awfully crowded. You know, there's going to be that clerk's office, there's going to be that, no, there's going to be too much stuff there. So we'll move that band shell out of the marketplace and over into Gull Lake Park. And that was not a silly idea because, of course, Gull Lake Park afforded so much more room for everybody to gather. And we have lots of pictures of bands making music in the park. So this is a park, or this is a band in Gull Lake Park in 1915. And you can see their lovely shiny instruments. They're all looking very, very aware of what's going on there. Little did they know, or maybe they already did know, that they would be changing those uniforms, those band uniforms, for those uniforms within a year. Yeah, so the Great War, that's the band of the 122nd Battalion in Gravenhurst standing beside the Opera House. Not all the citizens who were in that earlier band a year earlier would have joined the 122nd band. In actual fact, a number of them would have already signed up by that point to go to another battalion. They wouldn't have waited around for the 122nd to start recruiting. In actual fact, a number of fellows from Rama made up the bits that were missing from the band and did a very nice job of it as well. So you can see there the band of the 122nd. After the war, most of the soldiers were back by pretty much by April of 1919. Now that sounds like a long time after the war ended, but that's how long it took to get everybody back. The band has grown considerably at this point because these men, although still in uniform, are in fact all moving to Gravenhurst or coming back to Gravenhurst from wherever they've been. And their first thing they want to do is have something that they can do with their comrades in arms. And so, in fact, they're going to join the band. Playing in the park, you can see sort of those, the pine trees are looking sort of not very tall and quite big and fluffy, as pine trees do for a while. I skipped everything in between 1919 and 1949. I thought we're either going to focus on a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with the barge, and we're not going to get through anything that does, or I'm going to skip about 30 or 40 years, and I'm going to say, yeah, there was a lot of music. A lot of music. And there were all kinds of bands, and I've got pictures of all kinds of bands from all of those intervening years. But this is pretty neat because there was a fellow who belonged to the Rotary Club who had been traveling in the United States, and he happened to go to a community where there was music on the waterfront. And he saw that music on the waterfront. Now, it didn't say in his write-up that it was music on a barge, just music on the waterfront. But knowing we had a beautiful waterfront in Gull Lake Park, he thought to himself, we could bring that idea back with us. And so, in fact, he decided to ask the Rotary Club how would they feel about perhaps sponsoring or getting together the idea of a barge. Not a barge exactly, Fred, it was a floating stage.
That's right.
You want to comment on
Yes,
the floating
yeah.
stage?
I believe here at the top photograph is that actual stage, and it was pieces of dock that were actually floating, and they were moored together. You went out on a dock, and I can only imagine, I wasn't part of the floating stage, but I can only imagine a conductor waving a baton. And, as always, boats would go by, which would create a little bit of wake situation. And I'm glad I missed that particular era, because I always said if I ever fell in, it'd be the night they'd remember that for 50 years later. And but anyway, and the band members persevered, and beautiful concerts were held on those floating docks.
Here's one of them right here. So that's probably not long after the start of music on the barge. I guess that's either 1949 or 1950. You can see how different the barge looks. As Fred said, these are two pieces sort of tied together. You notice the lights all along the edge of the dock, just above the water. I'll be commenting on those in a minute. The barge looks quite different. It's all decorated with bunting and so on, which I thought was quite pretty. Lots of flags, lots of flags. Just two there right now, but eventually you're going to see more and more flags. But that is an early concert on the dock, so to speak. And you notice, by the way, that the ramp getting onto the dock is on the left-hand side. I was going to put another beauty pageant in there, and then I lost it. So I've got only the one, but we had many beauty pageants held on the barge. And the queen would always be selected and crowned and so on the barge. And there would be another form of entertainment at the same time as well. So there'd be somebody playing. And do you want to comment on who the judge usually was in these?
Yes, Gravenhurst was always fortunate to have a well-known wrestler, Whipper Billy Watson, was always the host. And then one year they managed to have Fred Davis, famous for Front Page Challenge. And he was there as the master of ceremonies. And each one of those queens came from a different community within Muskoka. I believe that was a photo taken of the Cavalcade of Color. And it was really a large event that went all the way through Muskoka.
They came in crowds to see it. There are a lot of things that we're talking about tonight that don't happen anymore. I guess there still are beauty pageants somewhere in the world. Yes, no, maybe not. I can't think of anyone where there might be, but imagine, I mean, these were held in every community, and then the winner from each community came, and then you had another one, and then you went to another one, and then you went to another one, and eventually you went to the world, you know, crazy, but lovely for those who like to do it. In 1957, under the stars, yes, and many more flags, you'll notice. Those are the flags I mentioned were coming, and more bunting still. Notice the chairs, sort of like your wooden kitchen chairs, but very nice ones. We were entertaining the Orpheus Men's Choir. Now, there were all kinds of men's choirs at this time, all over the place, and dozens of them were called Orpheus Men's Choirs. So there was one in Scotland, there were bunches in the United States, they were all over the place. The one that I think is represented here, although we're not flying an American flag that I can see, is actually from Phoenix, Arizona. They were on tour in Canada, and they were on tour in Ontario at the particular time that this concert occurred. So I'm guessing that this is the Orpheus Choir from Phoenix. Now, there were a lot of industrial choirs, if you can remember back, for those of you who are my age, remembering back to the fact that there were industrial choirs. There were things like the Men of the Deep, for example, in Welsh mining and so on. So these kinds of choirs were not unusual or unheard of by any means. Fred, I don't know whether you ever ran into this or not, but in 1957, on the 11th of July, they had to post a note in the newspaper to say, there won't be a Barge concert tonight. And actually, there won't be one anytime soon. In fact, it'd be delayed at least to July the 21st because part of the stage backdrop is blown away and some of it is down the lake, and we've got to go and retrieve it all and put it all back together. The water got so high that those lights we saw strung along the bottom of they were underwater. This is not a good thing if you're doing the electrics. You know, you might want to think twice about handling the wiring system or the sound system for that matter. So in fact, I don't know, did you ever run into a problem like this, Fred?
Yeah. Yeah, just one story at a time. I well remember about a half hour before a performance, what were they called, a downburst?
Yes.
Yeah. And speakers were flying everywhere, and but within moments the sun came out again, and we were still trying to gather ourselves personally up again, as well as equipment. But it was so hard to try and explain to those arriving in the park that we had just kind of gone through a major catastrophe. And so I always found that the more opinions of what the weather forecast was going to be, the more confused we would get. People would be driving in from Huntsville or Bracebridge and say, we just came through this enormous storms and wind, and they'd come from Aurelia. But my philosophy always was, you know, the show will go on as long as things are safe. And as you know, over the past decades, we've had a few wild storms that have gone through that have downed a lot of the trees in Gull Lake. And it was always usually, fortunately, either the night before a Barge concert or a couple of days after. So I'm very thankful that it never happened. Touch wood is right. Yeah.
It's your clean living.
Clean living, right. Yeah.
The Canadian Band Association in 1957 held its conference at what would become Muskoka Sands. Now, eventually I'm going to do a talk about what became Muskoka Sands and what there was first. But in actual fact, there was a tourist resort there right from the 1920s. And the Canadian Band Association held their concert there. And no doubt Huey Claremont, who did a lot of the organizing and getting the acts for this, no doubt he, shall we say, leaned on them or in some way pressured them to do a concert. and all to the good. I was going to tell those people at the back over there on the right-hand side where the back of their chair is, looks to me like it's just on the edge, you know? I think to myself, I want to yell out at them, move your chairs in a little bit closer, but anyway, they look kind of perilous to me. This maybe was our first really major coup, I think, in getting Rafael Mendez. His name is sometimes spelled with an S or sometimes with a Z. Anyway, we got him. And he came here on a tour across Canada and the United States. He was a recording artist in the United States. He played with the MGM studio orchestra on movie soundtracks and so on, and then went out on a solo sort of career. He was considered to be by many the world's greatest trumpet virtuoso. He was advertised that way, but it wasn't just in the advertising that he might or might not have had control of. The Los Angeles Times billed him that way in an article and said, this is by far the best trumpeter in the world. He had various techniques that I understand nothing about, having never tried to play a trumpet. I'm asthmatic, it would not have worked well. Anyway, he apparently had a number of techniques that other people just hadn't mastered. There he is on stage, and in that quintessential sort of pose that a trumpeter has when he's going to hit a high note, there he is, and he's hitting the high note for sure. That band behind him is once again the Barrie Collegiate Band. Now, the Barrie Collegiate Band wasn't what we would think of as your normal high school band. The Barrie Collegiate Band was internationally renowned. They traveled all over the place. They went to Europe. The Globe and Mail actually put all kinds of money into their trip to Europe to help them. And they played backup for all kinds of people, including Rafael Mendez. And they actually traveled with him a number of different venues before they went off on their trip to Europe. That's the crowd coming to listen to Rafael. I think that they're well packed in there. Yeah. The getting up will be the trick, I think. You know, who gets up first, and then who do you grab the help? In fact, they estimated 5,000 people came to that concert, and his comment was the Barge was the finest in the world. Now I have to think it might have been one of the only barges on which a concert might be being staged in 1957 or 58. But in actual fact, what I'll tell you a little later on is that a few people decided to try to copy us. It wasn't long after that Rafael Mendez concert that it was determined that, in fact, the Barge had to be improved. I mean, here we were having a great big band like that, you know, Barrie Collegiate Band on that stage, and they're, you know, on a floating stage. And we've got Rafael Mendez, who, as he hits a high note, a wave comes through and he swallows half of us. You know, I mean, it wouldn't be good for any number of reasons. So not only did we know that we had to replace the Barge by then, but in actual fact, Huey had done something else, Huey Claremont. I think he'd gotten a hold of, well, I'm going to say Paul Hellyer. I think that's who it was. It was a man who was a cottager in Muskoka. And he had heard by the grapevine that the Queen was coming to Canada. And if the Queen was coming to Canada, she would have an itinerary, and Paul Hellyer would be able to find out what that was. And Claremont wanted to know what that was. And then he wanted to have Gravenhurst included on it. So in actual fact, I'm not sure what kind of arm pulling and leg pulling and whatnot went on, but in actual fact, he got an agreement that, in fact, the only place in Muskoka where the Queen and Prince Philip would stop would be Gravenhurst. They would stop in Torrance to get on a train, but it's not quite the same thing as actually, you know, driving through and visiting for a minute. Now they had 20 minutes. That's all they had. But boy, did that throw people into action. I'll tell you, if you're going to build a new barge, and she's going to open the new barge for you because we're now going to get the thing done right away, then in actual fact, everybody had better, all hands on deck. Stanley White Jr. grew up here in Gravenhurst. His father was a dentist here, and he had a degree in architecture and so on. He worked in Ottawa for the government, but in actual fact, he also did some things for a number of other people and for us. And one of the things he did was not only the architectural rendering, but he did all the plans and so on that would comprise the barge. Any comments you want to make so far? By the spring of '59, it was starting to take shape. So you can see this is looking a lot more like the barge we recognize. It's now got a ramp that's coming to the right. Yeah, it's just starting to look a little more familiar. You can see that there's a bit of a note of frantic anticipation here. They are talking about the fact that the Queen and Prince Philip will arrive on July the 4th. The new barge construction on June the 18th is not completed. In actual fact, am I right in saying that it was completed the day they got here?
Yes. Is the answer.
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I believe, was when they got here. Probably 8 o'clock in the morning was when they were still, building the barge. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not that they were, slow at doing it, but it had to be financed. It had to be financed, as you can see here, by council put a bit of money in, Rotary Club, Board of Trade. I think the Lions Club put some money in. A few citizens, probably Gordon Sloan, I could imagine him putting money into this. Wow. They got here. Whoever has paintbrushes and pails in their hands have now dived off into the water, no doubt, and are off the barge, because here they come in an open air car. All the things we're talking about that aren't true anymore, that's one of them, isn't it? I mean, look at how relaxed they look and how relaxed they could be. I don't know what's changed. There's the poor old Mount. He's trying to hold back the crowd. Thousands of people came to Gull Lake Park. And along with the thousands of people who came, and that is Mayor Wanda Miller following the Queen down that little pathway, we had every mayor and wife of every mayor or reeve or whatever of every township and community in Muskoka all here. And the interesting thing is for women, this is women only. When I was reading the description of all of this, they were all wearing shantung, silk shantung dresses. I wondered if there was a chance that they all ended up in one of these colors, where it was the same color for a whole bunch of them. Oh, would have been a nightmare. Anyway, they were just all dolled up and hoping to meet her. They didn't get to meet her, by the way. No. Cindy Claremont, this very famous picture, got to present a bouquet of wildflowers from Muskoka to Her Majesty. And you can see that she's looking them over quite, sort of intently. I'm probably even thinking to herself, I wonder what that is. I wonder what that is. Philip has his usual really friendly smile on his face. This is early on in his marriage to the Queen. So he says to Cindy, "Oh, how old are you? Well, what's your name? How old are you? 8. Oh, I have a little girl who's just about that age." And Cindy turns and says, "Well, why didn't you bring her?" Which I thought was absolutely perfect. Why not?
I have one little anecdote, if I may.
Oh, you may.
Intercede just briefly. I'm told. So Cindy's mother was a member of the Catholic Women's League.
Yes.
And they quickly had to make all these sandwiches. They worked through the night, made the next day, make all these sandwiches, because I guess all the mayors, they had a lunch for them.
Yep.
Perhaps at St. Paul's, I don't know.
Yep.
But,
yep. Yes, they would have had to feed them, I'm sure, because I'm not sure where they would have gone otherwise, other than Sloan's, and it wouldn't have accommodated the crowd. So. There's poor Cindy in the back row. But, what's what's going on up there? I can't see anything. What are they doing? But anyway, the Queen looks very relaxed, I think. She's sort of leaning over to one side as though she's going to say something to Wanda Miller. And I think the whole thing looks quite relaxed for a person who is on a 20-minute schedule, right? Which includes the walking to the barge, walking from the barge, getting in the car and out. So pretty relaxed. Now, if I were looking for royalty, you know, the Queen, I always loved the Queen, and Prince Philip I thought was a sweetheart for a while. But there's my idea of royalty right there. 1961, Gordon Lightfoot and Terry Whalen tried out for the Mariposa Festival in Aurelia Boys. And they were told, no, thank you. You sound too much like the Everly Brothers.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not. So they auditioned for Music on the Barge, and we said,
Sure.
sure we did. Sure we did. I mean, look at them. As we say, posters were everywhere. They were always around telling us who was coming. Very collegiate band faithfully came on a regular basis when asked. A lot of artillery and military bands were around in those days. Another collegiate band there, and Swift Current, Saskatchewan, 2 different nights they played, was a junior collegiate band, a junior band. So there's very collegiate band, pretty much filling up the whole platform. Wanda's up in the
Perch.
the perch, yeah, the crow's nest, yep. She liked to sit up there whenever possible. Eventually, when she was no longer doing these because she wasn't well enough, and Fred took over directly from Wanda to manage the whole Music on the Barge business, it would be, I think Don Holstock and Helen sat up there,
Yes,
didn't they?
they did.
You never asked me
Well, there was.
We'll have a talk later.
Yeah.
Now, there's a junior band from Swift Current, Saskatchewan. They actually entertained here. That's a 63 picture, but they entertained here in 1962, in 1963, and 1967. In 62 and 63, both times coming all the way from Swift Current, Saskatchewan, they were competing at the CNE. In 67, you know where they were going, Expo 67, yeah. So this was a band with a lot of talent, and they obviously had some money behind them. You can see that this is a junior band because some of these little people are little people. I mean, they're not very big. And luckily they're not playing tubas, but anyway, yeah. Something that some of you may have had as an experience in high school, I did and was absolutely dumbfounded. The RCAF Air Transport Command Band came to my high school, which was a little wee high school of 200, maybe 220 people. And that band came and played on the stage in my high school. And I cried during the trumpeter's holiday. I just sobbed. I'd never heard anything like it. They came and they played here as well. And you'll see on a number of posters, maybe on a bunch of them that Fred has out there, the RCAF is on there. That band did a lot for the awareness of music in this country because they traveled all over, they played concerts all over, and they just generally gave people an idea of what music could sound like if they didn't have that kind of music in their own community. I'd have given anything to hear him. That's Bobby Jimby, and that's an actual Gravenhurst newspaper. Headline Sunday show on the Barge. Can you imagine we got Bobby Jimby? I don't know how we did that in 1967 because he was everywhere. He was absolutely everywhere playing that song that he wrote and made so famous that we could all sing right now. I'm sure of it. If we started off with Canada, you know, yeah, he wrote that and he played it everywhere he went. Every town he played in, he conscripted or organized or got together a group of 10, 12 little people. There's some of them right there. And then he sort of gave them the cues about how they can put in those little extra pieces that are in that song. And yeah, so everywhere he went, he had a whole bunch of kids singing with him. Of course, Mary.
What are the buildings in the background?
Good question. I haven't a clue, but that's on our paper. That's from our Gravener's paper. What I'm guessing is they used a stock photo from another community. Yeah, yeah. It does look like Toronto. It does, very much so. Yep. He was quite the ambassador. Really sad stuff about Bobby Jimby. He died in North Bay eventually, in a nursing home, sort of a pauper. He was paid so little for that song, always maintained that he was not ever angry about it or upset about it. But eventually some more royalties started to come in from other people using that song and so on. And he had them all transferred to the Boy Scouts of Canada. So, yeah. So there was a man without anything who, Well, the Americans took over the airwaves from the 16th to the 24th of July with their 24/7 nonstop broadcasting about these guys landing on the moon, getting there, landing, getting home, blah, 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 blah. The interesting thing was the newspaper in Gravenhurst said that, in fact, the moonwalk got competition for music on the barge because they brought in a bunch of different bands and musicians and so on, and they all played moon songs.
Couldn't be better.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So you'd have things like, Moon River, and, Fly Me to the Moon, etc. Another one of the many, many photos of girls being crowned on the barge. Many of you probably know, oh dear me. Yeah, Candy Jones on the left-hand side there. She was the queen in '68, and then she's now crowning Jean Kuhn. And I was going to call her on the other side. I was going to call her Cindy, but she's not. She's Christina Maxwell. I knew her younger sister, but didn't know her. I don't know how many people remember Tommy Common. Anybody who ever watched, the Tommy Hunter show would remember him. He had a lovely singing voice. He was sort of the calmer aspect of the show. The guy in the middle, Gordy Tapp, was not the calmer aspect of the show. He was usually the cut up and carry on and so on kind of a guy. And Tommy Hunter could go along with him, but Tommy Common was usually a pretty calm, had a very sweet voice, sang ballads and so on. When he played on the barge, he obviously played with, you can see it, Hugh Claremont and his band. Yeah. Tommy Common, unfortunately, too, had a very sad life and ended up in a very sad sort of situation at the end of his life. But 3,000 people came to see him that night. So, for a man who at times believed that he didn't matter to anybody, an awful lot of people thought he was great. You jump in, Fred.
Huey Claremont was wonderful because it was an era when live music was everywhere in Muskoka, all the major resorts, and Tommy Common had a love interest here in Muskoka that kind of brought him here every summer. So he would do the resort circuit. But Huey you never knew who Huey was connected with.
Yes.
And sure enough, he caught up with Tommy Common and said, "We got this stage in Gravenhurst, and we think you should come, and my band, and you'd like to sing with my band." And it became reality.
Yeah, the people that he brought here were phenomenal. To the Sands as well as to the Barge Opera House. Some people will know the guy that's on the right-hand side there, Rusty Draper. He played on the barge, and he played with Rudy Meeks. Now, Rudy Meeks was, at this point, he had not become the North American fiddling champion, but he was, in fact, the Canadian fiddling champion at this point. So he, too, was a person of some stature. And he was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And he used to turn up on shows like the Tommy Hunter show and so on as well. Another pageant. There's Brenda Smith being lovely as she's getting her photograph taken. She would go on, as all these girls did, would go on to, if they were Miss Gravenhurst, they would then go on to compete in Miss Cavalcade of Color or Miss Muskoka, and then they would go from there to Miss Canada, and then World was the oyster. Now there's a concert I wouldn't have missed for the world if I'm a year short. I came the year after that. But Henry Cuesta, I don't know how many people remember Henry Cuesta. My mother never missed the Lawrence Welk show. My father and I used to clear out the room, and we would go somewhere else and just chit chat. And then when my mother would yell, Henry Cuesta is about to play, we would come back and we would listen to him. And then when he was finished, we bolted out of there again. So yeah. Anyway, he again had phenomenal stature in North America. There were so many people who knew exactly who he was, and he was without a doubt one of the absolute stars of the clarinet. Played all over in concerts, played with all kinds of big bands and so on in the United States, and traveled in Canada, as we see. I thought this was a neat idea. In 81 and 82, the Muskoka Festival at the Opera House partnered briefly with the Barge and did a couple of concerts, one each year of 81, 82. And what they did was the songs and so on that were figuring in their musicals at the time. So they would actually be giving people a chance to hear some of those musicals who either maybe couldn't afford to go to, afford tickets at the Opera House, or maybe didn't have the time or whatever. In this case, of course, everything at the Barge was always free, and it was just a free will offering. So
it was a good partnership.
it was.
Very good partnership.
Yep. And I think a good idea. I love that picture. I would love to tell you that it's the Lawrence Scotts, because they in fact did play there, and my great uncle was a Lawrence Scott. But in actual fact, that's not the Lawrence Scotts. The Lawrence Scotts played on the Barge the year before this picture was taken. These guys are a local pipe band, and I can't tell. I couldn't blow up the drum big enough that I could read it without it getting too blurry. But it's either, it'll be either the pipe band in Bracebridge, or the one from the prison, or the one from the fire service, or whatever. There were 3 or 4 around. And I love the picture. I just think it's super. And there they are playing with the bifocals, partnering with them in a concert in the 1980s. And if we just blew that picture right up, we could see all kinds of faces there that we would have recognized and known.
Piece by piece, it was vandalized, and then thanks to the Rotary Club and a group of rather skilled carpenters from the Rotary Club, then it was rebuilt and put back on.
It's pretty vulnerable, that Barge is pretty vulnerable. We're lucky that we have it and have had it as long as we have. So there's, I said before, but it's after, the pipes and drums of the Lawrence Scotts up there, and they played in August 1990. The Carlton Show Band was quite well known around. They used to play all over the place, and they played here as well. That, unfortunately, with the blowing up, became a little on the blurry side. So some of them you can recognize, and every picture I tried, they were all smallish, and so I would have had to run into the archives and get a picture that I could try to blow up, and to be honest, I just didn't have the time to do it. But there's Terry Vint in the center and his whole band. Terry Vint was hired by John Brownlee in 1972 to do exactly what he did, which was to create a marching band. That's what John Brownlee wanted, was a marching band, and that's what he got. He got an orchestral group as well as a jazz group all kinds of other bits and pieces from within the band. But Jerry, in fact, took a whole group of people who had never touched an instrument and turned them into musicians. And he did a wonderful job of it. After he retired, Kathy Kilborn took over that role. And not only did she instruct the GHS band, but she also worked with bifocals and Muskoka Concert Band, and you name it. Every band and singing group in the area was under her direction at one time, along with Lynn Sargent. And it's hard for me to believe that both Terry and Kathy are gone. Just an example of some of the groups who did come here. We had all kinds of different groups on their way up or on their way down.
Can I jump in with a
Oh,
real
would
quick
you?
one on Tanglefoot, because
Yes.
it does conjure up some interesting memories for me. The government money was starting to dry up for military bands, and they suddenly kind of just disband the bus budgets. So suddenly these wonderful bands, the military bands that were touring the country, didn't have any way to visit venues like we had in Gravenhurst. And so I saw what the predicament was. Because I really counted on half the performances to be of a full orchestra style show. So suddenly I thought, okay, well, let's try something. So I found this group in Guelph called Tanglefoot. They were an up and coming folk group, and I thought, okay, let's try this. Well, they put on a wonderful show, but the audience was so geared towards orchestras and military bands. I actually stayed out of grocery stores for about 3 weeks after that performance, and then tried to just evolve slowly. And it was baby steps,
Yep.
but it kept the Barge alive. And they were one of the first groups that I introduced that was didn't have brass instruments with them. And but I always remember that. And but anyway, we persevered and carried on.
Indeed. Fred, who was the group that got lost on the way to the Barge?
Oh my goodness, yes.
More than one?
It was in my transitional years, and there was a group that were a Beatle tribute act. And anyway, the name escapes me. But anyway, the perfect weather that evening, and one of the band members arrived, and so we kind of watched, and it was getting about a half hour from showtime and 15 minutes from showtime. And of course, there were no cell phones in those days at all. But anyway, I guess somehow somebody knew somebody, and they phoned their house, and they said, well, where is the band? Well, we're just outside of Kitchener. Where is Gravenhurst? Well, I'd never done stand-up comedy in my life before, but I had to fill about 40 minutes and try and hold a park full of people, and just kept thinking, okay, I hope they're heading in the right direction. But I'll never forget that. Again, I was looking at the far side of the lake and thinking that would be a good spot to be as quickly as I could. But anyway, eventually they arrived about an hour late, and we carried on. But I mean, it was hard to keep everybody cool their heels for the length of time. But anyway, there were all those little things that happened behind the scenes that we carried on with.
Behind the scenes, indeed. There's a familiar looking group.
20 some years.
Yeah.
And again, that was just to test the waters, and it didn't appeal to everybody, but over the years, the audience grew, and these guys knew that the Barge had a very limited budget, and many times they were just barely covering their own personal expenses. Little aside, they were doing a tour in the West. And anyway, I guess their vehicle suddenly ran into some nails or something. But again, just had to kind of fill the time, and they arrived and put on a wonderful show. But great supporters of the Barge, and a lot of people didn't realize that they really just took their expenses. That's all they took. They would not charge their regular performance fee, and they became became kind of an institution to close off the season. A lot of people geared their holidays around their performance, and we all had good friendships with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, actually, Fred, the reason I think that they did all of that was you, because they, I think, looked upon you as a really good friend. And not only did they just take their, their expenses and so on, but I think they took their barbecues at your house.
Yes, yeah.
So you fed them. Yeah, there was a lot more to that story. Yeah, those guys became very popular. They were extremely popular with me. My husband and I traveled actually to Chatham one night to see them at the Wheels. And we traveled to all kinds of places to see them just because we enjoy their music so much. Anyway,
Who's the band?
oh, the Good Brothers. I'm sorry. Did I want to say that out loud? Oh my gosh, I guess I just assumed that everybody knew who they were. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, that is crazy. Yeah, the Good Brothers for sure. And as Fred says, they played here, what,
20 some, yeah,
23,
20,
24
yep,
years?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And yeah, people got to the point where they felt like they were friends. With Fred, they were. And there they are bringing it home in 2022. They're looking a little longer in the tooth at that point, but then so was I. So, I mean, I wasn't about to say, oh gosh, they've gotten old looking, because we all age together. So in actual fact, I don't think their playing had really in any way disintegrated from their early days. And they now had, well, Travis was what, a nephew?
Son.
Son, yeah, right. And a couple of boys from locally playing with them when they came through.
You can see the Christmas floodlights. I spared no expense for lighting. Got them on sale from Home Hardware.
Yeah, yeah. Fred knew how to squeeze the last,
Yeah.
yeah, the last penny out of anything, and had to. I mean,
Yeah.
when you take a look at the budget,
Oh my goodness.
and then you knew that it was a free will offering. Well, you know how much some people will offer. Other people are excited and they're going to drop in a tenner or whatever. Some people will throw in a loonie and go, there, I've done it, or nothing.
Yeah.
And,
I had to give up taking up collection because people would remind me that they paid taxes in Gravenhurst. Or they would take more. I get to the first group of people and they want to suggest who they would like to see on the barge. And Murray was quite popular at the time. Anyway, it was all fine.
I'd have had to hole up in my house over that one. Yeah, I told Fred the other day, Fred and I have met a couple of times about doing this talk. And what we do is actually we reminisce, because I've known Fred since 1973. So we reminisce and laugh. That's all we do. We don't actually talk about what we're supposed to be doing at all. We just sit and laugh. And I told him that I could come out on my porch and hear what was going on in the barge and decide whether I was going to go over or not based on what I could hear from my porch. Now that's just the beginning of it. Of course, Barry Brock took that picture for me from his kayak, but that was when it was just being done. It's a lot farther along than that. Although the parking lot, I think, is still a disaster. Am I right about that? Yeah. And I don't know what the farmer's market is going to do about that, but I'm not asking too many questions. Anyway, granite seating, I would strongly suggest that you bring a cushion to sit on. And somebody sit behind you whose knees you can lean against. Because if you're not in a lawn chair with a back on it, you're going to be sitting for a while, kind of like, so yeah. But
It's
yeah.
great though, because people are, it was weird to see everyone sitting on the hill in some of the earlier pictures, because people tend to avoid it now except for the geese.
Oh,
so-
yes, the geese are an issue.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think I'm really excited about this.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it'll draw people closer and
Yeah,
get people
yeah,
further into
yeah.
the park.
And I think as well, Fred said that he used to watch a lot of people slide down the hill.
Yeah. start of an evening, they'd be at the top. And then later on, and that was without the aid of crazy carpets. They would just, down they go, and they'd all be piled up on the beach. Now, Alan, you
Oh,
might be able to, can I announce the date of the opening of this?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
celebration is June 20th. It's a Thursday.
Thursday, the 20th?
I think 2:00.
Okay, an
Wow.
afternoon. Mhm.
So somebody is christening those, those,
Queen coming back?
Maybe a drag queen.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's a good thing, because I think it's going to make it possible for a lot of people to come and sit, not have to bring a lawn chair with them and so on. So all of that is all to the good. And
I think it's so appropriate because the Rotary Club of Gravenhurst was connected with the barge all through my era.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
saved my bacon many a year with hammers and saws, and in the early days of the fundraising. So this is just in keeping with
Yeah.
with their support of the barge and of Gull Lake Rotary
Gull Lake
Park
Rotary
too.
Park, exactly. And pretty much every installation that's in Gull Lake Park is a Rotary installation.
Yes,
The playground,
Yeah.
the
picnic shelter
covered
is
over
wonderful.
shelter, the picnic shelter. I thought I'd throw in the lineup for this year. That's who's turning up this year. They're all tribute bands, pretty much, but actually they're tribute bands for a lot of bands that I like. I'm not sure how my daughter would feel about that lineup. She would be going, Doobie Brothers, really? But hey.
I didn't see that one.
Fred at the helm for 50 years, and weren't we lucky? Yes, yes. He was interviewed, and that picture came from the interview. Yes, it
thank
did,
you.
yes.
Yeah.
Just about.
Getting there.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, weren't we lucky? Because in fact, we had him in the Opera House and we had him on the Barge as well. And we've had him in so many other venues doing things for us that, yeah, I think we're going to either have to clone him or bronze him. I'm not sure which it's going to be, but anyway, one or the other, I think, is what has to happen. That's the ending, and I've left enough time for questions. So my hour is drawing to a close.
Just repeat the question when you're asked. So that-
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because of the exercise.
Yes, I'm just asking for questions and saying that in actual fact, we've talked for an hour and now we've got some time for a few questions. Yes, ma'am.
I noticed when it was still the docks. the
Yes.
floating docks, and you had a piano.
Yes.
I'm thinking, like, did you drag it there and then drag it back every time? Like, where did it come from? The opera house?
Yeah, either that or someone's living room. Yeah, you could,
Before your time.
you could find out who your friends were when it was piano making day. But there is, and I have been told from good sources that there are several pianos that are behind the barge. And they said, oh, they'll be okay. Let's leave it here. It'll be fine. But isn't it amazing when the strength is needed to throw a piano in? But yeah, my goodness, pianos, it didn't matter what kind of wheels you had under them. They were widow makers.
Yep,
Really
absolutely.
something, yeah.
Remember the group that came and he always took his piano stool, bench into the water.
Yes, do I remember the gentleman that would, yeah, and he would light his piano on fire, which was always a little bit unnerving. And it was a Jerry Lee Lewis tribute. And fortunately, I think I had him a couple of times, highly entertaining guy, he knew his piano. But anyway, his demise was, I believe, his house burned down. And that was the final performance that he had. Yes, I remember him well.
Should we be laughing? No, but at the same time, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
question.
thank you, Pat.
Unearthed
Yeah.
the story.
Eventually I'll remember. Some things, great balls of fire. That's,
Yeah,
thank you,
it
Rob. Yeah.
probably was.
Yeah. Some shows we try and forget, but
Yeah. from anyone. Anybody else?
I have a question. Didn't the prisoners of war do the stairs? there?
Yes.
Yes,
They
are they
did.
still going to be there?
I think they're still there. I don't
Mhm.
believe that they were removed. They were not supposed to be removed. They did the break wall as well. The actual fact is there was a fellow in the POW camp who was by trade a park designer, if you want to call them that, and a German. And he volunteered to do a sort of a mock-up for what the park entrance and so on could look like and show it to town council. He couldn't show it to town council, but give it to town council to be looked at. And so in fact, that's what he did. And he drew up quite a lavish entry. Never really got done. It was a little too lavish, I think, for council's, pocketbook or taste or whatever. But what he did do was actually suggest that there should be, a rock retaining wall. There should be, the steps down and so on. They actually built a little dock as well, parallel to the regular government dock, and they put a little tiny lighthouse boat this tall on the end of it, just as a sort of a decoration. And the POWs actually did the work. The interesting thing is, all of those POWs, by and large, were officers and could not be made to work. Geneva Convention said you can't make officers work, but they did have a few guys in there that were like the cooks and the batmen and so on. And they had a bunch of officers who were quite happy to get outside and do something. They were just so tired of just not doing anything. And so, in fact, they volunteered and they built the steps, they built the retaining wall, they built the little dock out as well. Yeah. So the only things that are left, I think, maybe part of the retaining wall is still there, although that may have come out with this, but the steps are still there.
Good question for you. I know, Fred, you used to have a lot of problems with weather, probably pulling your hair out when
When there was a bit, yeah.
Was there ever any talk, I know it's expensive, covering the barge one time?
Yeah, every time we'd have a rain out, of course, it would bring it out. But and there were discussions. I did have a couple of companies that were awning companies. We were concerned about the wind, lifting it off. And the other concern was always that if there was thunder or lightning involved, the last place you wanted to be was underneath those white pine. And so it certainly did come up, Tom, on several occasions during my era. And but we decided that the best was to leave it, and we just cut our losses. It was quite disappointing sometimes. We'd get halfway through a show, and as I say, all the best laid plans would change in a hurry. But we would watch it rain down at the overpass at the south end of the lake, and hope that the wind was keeping it down that way too. So yeah, but it was always meant to be an open type concert. There was concerns about the sound carrying, that whether we'd have to use more amplification if there was a roof over top of it or not. So yeah, good point.
There was something I was going to actually ask about, and I forgot to do it when I was showing these, but in the middle of one of those slides, there's a picture of the lawn, and then you're looking down, towards the barge, and there's a box on the lawn set into the lawn.
The bunkie.
Yes.
Yes.
Or bunker.
Bunker, yeah. There was a gentleman here in Gravenhurst had a TV repair shop when TVs were repaired. And it was Keith Bradley. And Keith was a very technical individual, and he always looked after the sound requirements and would run a line out. And I was always mesmerized by his capabilities. But it was quite a simple system that he had, but it did the trick. And long before high tech and Bluetooth systems, and Keith would wrap up all the cables at the end of the night and pack it home. And
That's amazing.
again,
You guys were entertaining 3,000 back then, and we're entertaining
Yeah,
2,000 now.
you often wondered how
Wow.
how you pulled it off. But yeah, I was very blessed to be able to follow a lot of very skilled people and talented people, and they were all engaged in the barge. So I just kind of fell in after Wanda could no longer do the position that she had.
I thought an interesting conversation you and I had was when people would say, well, why don't we just move it to the Opera House? Why don't we move the concert there? And then you told me some of the stories that happened when you tried to do that. I think people would be interested in knowing.
Oh, it was probably one of the worst nights of my life. Anyway, I was lucky enough to find a Shania Twain tribute. And of course, you can imagine the popularity of that show. Well, it did get rained out, and I had made